Hi everyone, it's Ren here. Welcome to my room, guys. You might be surprised to see me today on a Saturday because I usually publish my videos on Sunday. But you know what? The video on Sunday will still come out. That's a given, that's the regular videos. But these days I'm feeling at times a little bit inspired to add some content throughout the week, but it depends very much on my mood. Today I feel like it. So the discussion today, as you will have seen from the title, is the INFJ an illusion, a myth, a chimera, a little story we like to tell ourselves to feel better about ourselves, to use it as an excuse to talk about ourselves, to circle jerk, as some anti-MBTI people sometimes put it. Well, before I move on to the crux of the matter, let me just remind you quickly that I've written 2 books in the last couple of years. This novel, The Infinite Castle, is just out. So if you're interested in a story where it seems like the main character is an INFJ and you want to support my fictional work, please have a look. And obviously the Ecstatic Soul, the sort of reference among like deep books about the INFJ personality itself, both less than $10. All the links in the description box below. Don't forget you can also follow me on Patreon to support me. That also is provided in the description below. Okay, so it's a kind of a tough discussion that we're going to approach today. I put it in a somewhat provocative fashion in the title. So I suppose the first thing that we need to ask ourselves is, what exactly do we mean by this question? Although I think that we have a strong intuition of what this means. It is, as you know, somewhat trendy to, or common to call MBTI an illusion, to liken it to astrology or whatever. And as part of that critique, as part of that broader attack on, this framework, I think that of the 16 personality types, the INFJ personality type is probably the most targeted because, well, let's be honest, if you were to kind of scope and probe the entire MBTI personality community, the INFJ is in some senses the most popular, the most prized, and the most subject to mythologizing, partly because Carl Jung himself, the author behind all this, is seen as an INFJ by most people. So there's a lot of lore around the INFJ, and there's no doubt that some of this lore seems to not have much basis in fact or experience. But the question is whether some equals all. In other words, does the proposition that some aspects of the INFJ are mythological equal all aspects of the INFJ are mythological? Now, obviously, this is a basic logical error, which has been known since Aristotle, the inventor of logic, that, it's a false equivalency, obviously. Some picks out elements in a set, all picks out all the elements in a set, so the propositions are obviously not the same, okay? So in order to defeat that false equivalency, or, although we don't really have to defeat it because it's clear by itself, but in order to show that this false equivalency is happening, I think it will be enough evidence to show how, there's some elements of the INFJ are mythological, but exactly for this reason, and as part of that very logical structure, some elements of the INFJ personality are not mythological, from which it follows, obviously, that not all elements of the INFJ personality are mythological, and this is partly why I suspect, there's almost 11,000 followers to my channel, because my channel, if I allow myself to get a little bit meta in this video, isn't really providing like the food for INFJs, like or would be INFJs thirst for mythological narratives that maybe some other channels provide. There's no doubt that there's popular INFJ channels on the internet, on YouTube, that are a little bit more in that, following that kind of path. And they're more popular than my channel, partly because they kind of feed that craving. Now, I refuse to feed that craving, partly because it's not my temperament, partly because it's not my interest, and also partly because maybe given that there's a strong one element in my Enneagram, I mean, that's a kind of account you could give of it, but I just would see it as dishonest. I try to focus to the extent I can on the truth. And for me, if you like, the fallacy about the criticisms of the INFJ personality as an illusion within the broader illusion of MBTI personality framework, the fallacy is to equal sum to all. It's to say, just because some people do it, all people do it. I like to think that my channel and the Ecstatic Soul and other things I do show that there is something to be done that is truthful and constructive and helpful from an INFJ perspective. Now, the way in which I think that we can best understand this is to consider that usually when people accuse, subscribers to the INFJ conception as being following a myth or a circle jerk or whatever you want to call it, it's because they speak from a stance of what they consider to be scientific objectivity. It's usually this scientific objectivity that guides them, that makes them feel empowered and confident enough in their background, knowledge, and convictions, that they can point to what does not belong, what does not fit the criteria of their set objectivity, so that they can demote it as not worth talking about and just an excuse for talking about ourselves. Now, the thing is, what these people don't realize, and often they don't realize it because they're actually not quite as knowledgeable as they think, is that in the words of Richard Rorty, himself very influenced by Wittgenstein, had a conversation about this recently with my partner, and that was quite illuminating. Well, there's no God's eye view. Science aims to have a God's eye view of things, but science, or would-be scientists, are too apt to think that scientific progress is based on finding what's true, whereas scientific progress could be construed as, ever getting closer to the truth, but really that's one among possible narratives that you can give about scientific progress. I mean, another narrative that you can give about scientific progress is that it's looking for stronger and stronger explanatory frameworks of how the world works based on empirical corroborations that they find for their experiments, corroboration of their hypotheses. In which case here, we don't even have to worry too much about what's true and what's not true. You worry more about what provides a satisfying explanation of the phenomena of reality according to the criteria that you define. And from this perspective, it's interesting that, well, okay, what's a good explanation of personality? Now, what's a good explanation of personality is kind of up for discussion. It's up for discussion whether a scientific explanation of personality is a good explanation. And here is the point that I think is very important to emphasize, is that, sure, MBTI, to say that it is like a thoroughgoing scientific theory of personality would be pushing it. I have stressed in previous videos that there are scientific elements that could definitely be pushed in the MBTI direction. It all depends on what method you take and whether you are open to the idea that MBTI is open to error, is open to being falsified. Once you accept that, you've made a strong step in the direction of scientificity. But to say that MBTI is a thoroughgoing scientific framework, again, it's probably pushing it a little bit. But the interesting insight comes from when we imagine what would be a thoroughgoing scientific theory of personality, that we're scientific to the core, with a physicalist ontology to the core. Well, that would be a framework that essentially reduces personality to neural frameworks. It would reduce personality to the physiological apparatus of each individual. It would have no space for subjective qualitative experiences, no space for the description of consciousness as it is lived by either really down to individual people, or if we were a bit more ambitious, like MBTI is, like personality theories are in general, to typologies of personalities, trying to single out phenomena of consciousness that are peculiar to different types. So the Ecstatic Soul is an attempt at describing, the phenomena of consciousness for people of the INFJ persuasion personality. All the qualitative elements, all the subjective elements that are really, really emphasized through, not always through MBTI as a framework, but within discussions that arise among people within the MBTI community, contributing to an enrichment of the conversation. This conversation is qualitative. If you were to have a thoroughgoing, testable, replicable, super scientific, according to certain sets of standards, theory of personality, you would lose all that detail. So the question would then be, well, that scientific account would provide an explanation of personality if it existed, and there's no reason why it would not exist. But would it be enough for us? Would it be enough for people? That is a very fundamental question. Would we still not need an explanatory framework, something to give us explanation of the phenomena of our subjective consciousness? Now, that cannot be provided by science. But the fact that it cannot be provided by this thoroughgoing physicalistic science doesn't mean that it should not be provided. What an incredibly impoverished world we would be living if all that we could explain about ourselves were just relations of neural frameworks, neural patterns, and their linkages with our neural, central nervous system in general, and behavioral patterns that have no subjective contents, qualitative contents to it. Of course, an immeasurably large part of our reality, our genuine reality, would be lost. So it's much more useful to think in terms of how science and something that is more qualitative and cannot completely qualify in science complete each other. And from this perspective, the description of the INFJ personality, a description of the INFJ personality, is going to stand or fall to the extent that it provides an explanation that real people of flesh and blood relate to, can make sense of, and even more importantly, that it supplies a vocabulary with which people can further enrich and hone and harness those explanations of personality and have conversations. So the most important thing is not to think about how true something is or how quantifiable something is, but does it provide you a useful vocabulary to enrich your descriptions of how you experience your consciousness? And I think that it's a very important element to remember at all times when you're discussing personality. And so then the question becomes, what is the most useful vocabulary, knowing that you can have different vocabularies for different purposes, more scientific vocabulary and more qualitative vocabulary. And from this perspective, there's nothing wrong with the discussion of the INFJ, and I personally hope that at my modest level, I'm contributing to this ever-evolving, ever-enriching, ever-changing vocabulary. But now, let me know what you think in the comments, guys. These were my philosophical thoughts for the day. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you, I was going to say next time, but really, that's tomorrow. All right. See you guys. Take care.